The millionaire businessman was living a life that many people envied. He had built his wealth from the ground up, turning a small business into a large empire. His name was recognized in the city, his face known from newspaper articles and charity events. He had everything: fancy cars, expensive suits, and a mansion that felt more like a hotel than a home. But even with all his success, there was always something missing. He had no idea that the thing he lacked most was about to walk right into his life. It was at a high-profile charity gala, where the rich and powerful gathered to talk business and give back to their communities. He was enjoying the evening, mingling with fellow millionaires and philanthropists, when something strange happened. A young woman approached him cautiously. She was dressed simply compared to the lavish outfits of the other guests, but there was something about her that made him pause. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Are you Mr. Turner?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the buzz of conversation. The millionaire turned to face her fully, trying to place her in his mind. Her face was familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen her before. His mind raced through years of business meetings, friends, and family members, but nothing clicked. "Yes, that's me," he replied with a polite smile, but there was a question in his eyes. Who was she? How did she know him? "My name is Jasmine," she said, looking at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "I'm your daughter." The words hit him like a cold shock. His brain seemed to freeze as he stared at her, unable to speak. His eyes quickly scanned her features, trying to see any resemblance to himself, but he couldn't find any. Jasmine, a daughter. How could this be true? He had never heard of her before, not even a whisper. He was married once, many years ago, but he thought his wife had never had children. The shock of her words made his thoughts scatter. He opened his mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. He was about to ask for more clarification when Jasmine continued, as if she had already predicted his confusion. "I know this is hard to believe," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I've been trying to find you for years. I wanted to tell you everything, but I had no idea where to start." The millionaire's mind was spinning. Jasmine's words didn't make sense. He hadn't heard from his ex-wife in years, not since their bitter divorce. And to think that he had a daughter all this time, a daughter who had been kept a secret from him, was too much for him to absorb. He asked her to sit down, hoping that hearing more details would bring some clarity to the situation. As they found a quiet spot away from the crowd, Jasmine began to explain how she had been raised in foster care after her mother had told her that her father had died. She went on to describe how she had struggled to survive on the streets, never knowing that the man she had been searching for was living a life of luxury, oblivious to her existence. The millionaire felt a mix of guilt and confusion rise in his chest. How had he not known? Why had he not been told? The questions were endless, and yet they all pointed to one thing. He had missed so much of his daughter's life. As the night went on, his thoughts were consumed by the mystery of his daughter's existence. This was a meeting he never could have predicted, and yet here she was, right in front of him, waiting for answers. Jasmine's words hung in the air, leaving the millionaire in a state of disbelief. He had always thought he knew everything about his past, but here she was, claiming to be his daughter, a daughter he had never known existed. He struggled to process what he had just heard, the shock making it hard to focus. He stared at her, trying to make sense of the situation, but it felt like his mind was playing tricks on him. The silence between them stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Jasmine spoke again, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "My mom never told me who my father was," she began, her eyes looking down as she fiddled with the hem of her sleeve. "She told me that you were gone, that you had died. I grew up not knowing anything about you." The millionaire felt a jolt of pain at her words. To hear that his daughter had lived her life in the dark, believing that he was dead, was like a slap in the face. He had no idea that this had been her reality. He thought back to his past with her mother, his ex-wife, and the painful memories of their broken relationship. Their divorce had been messy, full of bitterness and anger. But he never imagined that it would lead to his daughter being kept from him. How? How is that possible? He finally managed to ask, his voice rough with emotion. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't I know? Jasmine took a deep breath before answering. I don't know exactly why, she said quietly, but from what I've gathered, she didn't want you to know about me. She didn't want to deal with the complications. It was easier for her to say that you were dead, and I guess I just grew up believing it. The millionaire's mind raced as he thought about the implications of her words. How could his ex-wife have lied to him for so many years? Why would she hide something so important? He remembered how they had drifted apart, their marriage ending in chaos. But he never thought that their separation would lead to something like this. As Jasmine continued to explain, the millionaire's thoughts kept drifting back to the time when his ex-wife had claimed to have an abortion. He remembered how she had convinced him that it was for the best, that they weren't ready for a child. He had trusted her then, accepting the decision without question. But now, hearing Jasmine's story, it all felt like a lie. She wasn't an abortion. She was here, alive, and in front of him. I never knew I had a father, Jasmine continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I always wondered what happened to him, why my mom never talked about you. I spent years looking for you, but I never thought I would actually find you. The millionaire was struck by her words. She had spent so much of her life searching for him, and he had been completely unaware. He felt a deep sense of regret. All these years, he had thought he was living his best life, but he had missed out on something far more important, his own flesh and blood. I'm sorry, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I had no idea you existed. I don't know what to say. Jasmine's eyes softened as she looked at him. You don't need to say anything, she replied. I just wanted you to know that I'm here, that I'm real. I wanted to meet you. The millionaire took a deep breath, his heart heavy with the weight of the truth. His world had just turned upside down. Everything he thought he knew about his past, about his family, was now in question. But one thing was clear. This was a moment that would change everything. His daughter was here, standing in front of him. And no matter how complicated or painful the journey ahead might be, he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. As the conversation continued, the millionaire found himself struggling with so many emotions. He had always believed that his life had turned out exactly the way he wanted it. Wealth, success, respect. But now, sitting across from Jasmine, everything seemed uncertain. Her words weighed heavily on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed so much, not just in terms of his daughter's life, but also in terms of the choices he had made in his past. Jasmine, noticing the confusion in his eyes, took a deep breath. She was still shaking from the emotional conversation, but she knew she had to explain. I was just a kid, she started. When I was born, my mom told me that you were gone, that you had died. I didn't know any better, so I grew up thinking that story was true. She paused, looking out at the city lights from the window as if searching for the words. But as I got older, something didn't feel right. I started asking questions about you, about why we didn't have any pictures of you, why she never spoke of you. Every time I asked, she'd get upset, and I learned to stop asking. I never thought I'd actually find you. The millionaire's heart sank as he listened. He could imagine how difficult it must have been for her, growing up without knowing her father. He had always taken for granted that his life had been complete. But hearing about the years Jasmine had spent in the dark, searching for him, made him realize just how wrong he had been. He looked at her, feeling an overwhelming mixture of guilt and sadness. But you were looking for me all this time. His voice was barely a whisper, almost as if he couldn't believe it. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you try harder to reach out? Jasmine's eyes met his, and there was a deep sadness in her gaze, but also a quiet strength. I did try, she said, her voice soft but firm. I didn't know where to begin, but I kept searching. I thought you'd never want to know me. After all, my mom said you didn't care. She said you didn't want a child, and that I was better off not knowing you. The millionaire struggled to hold back his emotions as the weight of her words sunk in. He had never thought of himself as a cold person, but this was a reality he had never faced. His ex-wife had painted a picture of him that he never intended, and now he saw the impact of that lie. His daughter, who could have had a relationship with him, had grown up alone, feeling abandoned and rejected. He had missed out on years he could have spent with her. "You were right to look for me," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I should have been there for you. I should have known. I never imagined you were out there, and I've failed you." Jasmine shook her head gently, a soft smile forming on her lips despite the weight of the conversation. "It's not your fault," she replied quietly. "It was never your fault. I know things weren't easy between you and Mom. I just didn't know you, that's all. But now that I found you, I want to know who you really are." Her words brought a sense of peace to the millionaire, even though there was still so much left unsaid. He wanted to tell her everything, to make up for all the lost time, but he knew it wasn't going to be easy. Trust couldn't be rebuilt in a single day. "I'm here now," he said finally, "and I'll do everything I can to make this right. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to be part of it. I don't want you to feel like you've been alone anymore." Jasmine's eyes glistened with tears, but she nodded. "I want that too." The two of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared past lingering between them. The millionaire's mind raced, filled with questions he didn't have answers to. How would he make up for the years lost? How could he rebuild a bond that had been shattered by so many lies? But one thing was clear. This was a new beginning. He was no longer just a successful businessman, living a life full of accomplishments. He was a father, and he had a lot of work ahead of him to prove it. The millionaire sat back in his chair, his mind swirling with everything he had just learned. He had always prided himself on being in control of his life, on having the answers to any problem that came his way. But right now he felt lost. Jasmine's story didn't just shatter his view of his past. It changed everything. For years, he had believed his life was carefully planned. Yet now, here was a daughter he never knew existed. He had been left in the dark, and it was his own fault for not asking the right questions. He tried to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting back to his ex-wife, the woman he had once loved. He remembered their relationship, the happy moments and the difficult ones. Their marriage had started with so much promise, but over time, it had turned into something that was hard to repair. The constant arguing, the misunderstandings, and ultimately their divorce. But he had never expected something like this. A daughter, an entire life, kept from him. His mind kept circling back to the one conversation that haunted him the most, the one where his ex-wife had convinced him she had an abortion. He recalled how she had told him that it was for the best, that they weren't ready for a child. She had explained it in a way that seemed logical, even though he knew something didn't feel right. He had trusted her, and now, the truth was a hard pill to swallow. With the weight of everything pressing on him, the millionaire finally decided it was time to confront his past. He couldn't move forward with Jasmine without understanding everything, especially what had happened with his ex-wife. So he picked up the phone and dialed her number. The phone rang a few times before she picked up. Her voice on the other end was as calm and cold as ever. "Hello. I need to talk to you," he said, his voice firm. There was no room for pleasantries, no small talk. This was serious. "I don't know what you want to talk about," she replied, her tone defensive. "I thought we were done with this, Mike." "I'm not done with it," he replied, swallowing the frustration that rose in his throat. "You lied to me. You told me you had an abortion, and now I find out I have a daughter. You lied to me all these years." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone, as though she was deciding whether or not to respond. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer but still distant. "I didn't want you to have to raise a child. We weren't ready. It was the right thing to do." The words stung him, but he had to keep his calm. "The right thing to do," he repeated, his voice thick with disbelief. Do you know what that cost me? Do you have any idea how much I missed? How much Jasmine has missed? All these years, I believed you and trusted you, and I didn't even know I had a child." His ex-wife let out a deep sigh. "It wasn't easy for me either, Mike. You don't know the whole story. It wasn't just about you. It was about us. About me. I didn't want you to be tied down to something you didn't want." The millionaire's head spun. How could she say that? How could she have made such a life-altering decision without considering how it would affect him? He had a right to know, to be involved. But now, all he could do was try to make up for the lost years. He couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could help rebuild his relationship with Jasmine. "I don't want to fight about the past anymore," he said, trying to calm himself. "But I want to know what happened. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why didn't you let me be a part of Jasmine's life?" Another long pause followed. "I thought you'd never want to be part of it," she finally admitted. "And I didn't want to burden you. I thought you'd walk away. I thought you'd resent me for it. It was easier for both of us to just pretend it never happened." The millionaire felt a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. He had trusted her with his life, with their future, but she had taken that trust and twisted it. Still, as painful as the truth was, he knew it was time to move forward. "I'll never forgive you for this," he said quietly, "but I'm going to be there for Jasmine. I'll do whatever it takes to be a father to her. I just want her to know I'm here now." The line went silent again, and he could feel the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. It was clear that his ex-wife wasn't going to apologize or explain further. All he could do now was focus on the future, on the daughter who had come into his life unexpectedly, but who now had a chance at a relationship with her father. After the phone call with his ex-wife, the millionaire felt a heavy weight in his chest. He sat alone in his office, the city lights flickering through the large windows, but his thoughts were far away. He couldn't shake the conversation he had just had with her. It felt like a punch to the gut, hearing her admit to all the lies she had told him, to the secrets she had kept for so many years. But there was more to it. He didn't just feel anger or betrayal. He also felt a deep sadness for Jasmine. How could he have missed all this? How could he have been so blind to the fact that he had a daughter out there, struggling in a world that had turned its back on her? He had spent so many years focusing on his career, thinking his success would make up for everything. But now, it all seemed so pointless compared to the realization that he had missed out on his daughter's life. He couldn't undo the past, but he could still try to make things right, and that's exactly what he needed to do. The next day, he arranged to meet Jasmine again. This time, he wasn't just the wealthy businessman. He was her father, and he needed to show her that he was ready to take responsibility for the years they had lost. He couldn't make up for everything that had happened, but he could at least be there for her now. When they met at a quiet cafe, Jasmine looked different. She still had the same quiet strength, but now there was a certain vulnerability in her eyes that hadn't been there the day before. She wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was his daughter, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood the meaning of family. They sat down across from each other, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Jasmine was the first to break the silence, her voice soft but steady. "Do you think I'm just going to forget everything?" she asked. "Do you think that I can just pretend like I haven't spent my whole life wondering where you were, wondering why you didn't want me?" Her words stung, and the millionaire felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to explain, to apologize, but he knew that words wouldn't be enough to heal the years of hurt that had built up between them. "I don't expect you to forget anything," he said quietly, "and I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I just want you to know that I'm here now. I've made mistakes, Jasmine, and I can't change the past. But I can promise you that I'll be here for you from now on. I want to help you, be a father to you in whatever way you need." Jasmine looked down at the table for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She seemed to be weighing his words carefully, trying to decide what to say next. After a few moments, she looked back up at him, and her expression was softer, though still guarded. "I don't know what to think," she admitted. "For so long, I had this image in my head of what my father would be like. I imagined you would be this perfect person who would just make everything better. But now it's not that simple. I don't even know who you really are. And I'm scared, Mike. I'm scared that if I let myself trust you, I'll just be disappointed again." Her honesty hit him hard, but it also made him realize just how deep the wounds went. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. He had to prove himself to her, and that was going to take time. He couldn't rush it, no matter how much he wanted to. Jasmine had lived her entire life without him, and now he had to be patient and let her decide what kind of relationship they could have. "I understand," he said gently, "and I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I know it's going to take time, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I just need you to know that I'm here, and I won't give up on you." Jasmine didn't respond immediately, but the look in her eyes softened to just a little. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way to each other. As they continued to talk, the millionaire realized that this wasn't just about making up for lost time. It was about building something new, a relationship based on honesty, understanding, and most importantly, trust. He wasn't going to rush it, but he would do everything he could to prove that he was worthy of the chance to be her father. As the days passed, the millionaire found himself thinking about Jasmine constantly. He couldn't help but replay their conversations in his mind, trying to find a way to make up for all the lost years. It wasn't easy. Jasmine had been through so much, and he was still just a stranger to her, a man who had failed to be there when she needed him the most. But despite the difficulty, he was determined to rebuild their relationship. One afternoon, he invited her to his home, hoping that spending time together in a more relaxed setting might help bridge the gap between them. When she arrived, he could see the hesitation in her eyes. It was clear that Jasmine still wasn't sure how to feel about him, but he could also see that there was a slight change, an openness, perhaps a small seed of trust beginning to grow. "Thank you for coming," he said warmly, trying to make her feel comfortable. "I know this isn't easy, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. Whatever you need, I'm ready to help." Jasmine nodded but didn't say anything right away. She had seen the wealth, the fancy cars, the mansion. But it was hard for her to imagine herself in this world, especially after everything she had been through. She had grown up in foster homes, moving from one place to another, never truly feeling at home. The idea of stepping into this luxurious life felt foreign to her, almost too much to accept. They sat down in the living room, where the millionaire had prepared a simple meal. It wasn't much, but he hoped it would be enough to show her that he wanted to build something genuine between them, not just rely on his wealth to fix everything. He wanted their relationship to be real, something they could both share, not just another grand gesture. As they ate, they began to talk more easily. At first, their conversation was small, almost like the awkward beginning of a friendship. Jasmine spoke about her experiences growing up, the struggles she faced, the loneliness she often felt. The millionaire listened quietly, absorbing every word, realizing just how much pain she had carried with her for so long. "It wasn't always easy," Jasmine admitted. "I learned to take care of myself. I had to. No one else was going to. But there were times when I just wanted someone to care, to tell me it was going to be okay." The millionaire felt a pang of guilt. He had never been there for her, not in any real way. He had been busy with his business, consumed by his own world. He couldn't change the past, but hearing her talk about the years she spent on her own made him more determined to be there for her now. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No one should have to face the world alone. I wish I had been there for you." Jasmine looked at him, her eyes softening just a little. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive everything," she said quietly. "But I'm trying. I'm trying to see you for who you are now, not who I thought you were." I need time, Mike. I need to figure out if I can trust you. The millionaire nodded, understanding her hesitation. He wasn't asking for forgiveness right away, but he was willing to prove himself. He had no expectations of her except for her honesty, and he was ready to take whatever steps were necessary to show her that he wasn't just a stranger, but her father. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, he said gently, but I want you to know that I'll do whatever it takes. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here to stay, Jasmine. We'll take it one day at a time. Jasmine was quiet for a moment, and for the first time, the millionaire saw a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was something. He knew their relationship wasn't going to be easy, but this was a start, a small beginning that could eventually lead to something stronger. As the afternoon turned to evening, they continued to talk, their conversation becoming more relaxed. It wasn't perfect, and there were still so many things they needed to work through, but they were making progress. The millionaire didn't expect everything to be fixed in one day, but he knew that as long as they were both willing to try, they could build something meaningful together. The weeks that followed were a blend of quiet moments and small steps towards something new. The millionaire found himself thinking about Jasmine at all hours of the day, replaying their conversations in his mind, wondering how to help her trust him more. He understood that trust couldn't be rushed, but it was hard to be patient. He had lost so much time, and every day without a real connection felt like a missed opportunity. Jasmine, on the other hand, was still trying to find her place in his world. She had been hesitant to accept the offer of moving into his home, and though she spent more time with him, it was always at a distance. She had her own struggles. Learning to trust again, learning to believe that people could truly care. But there were moments when she allowed herself to soften, when she would smile at something he said or accept his help without hesitation. One afternoon, after spending a quiet day together, the millionaire took a deep breath and decided it was time to talk more seriously about the future. They were sitting in the garden of his house, a space filled with flowers and soft sunlight, a peaceful contrast to the turmoil in his heart. He looked at Jasmine, who was sitting quietly, her gaze fixed on the garden, but her mind clearly somewhere else. "Jasmine," he began, his voice calm but full of purpose, "I know I can't change the past, and I'm not trying to. But I want you to know that I'm committed to being here for you. I want to help you build your future, whatever that looks like." Jasmine turned to look at him, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her expression. She could see that he meant what he said. It wasn't just empty words. He wasn't offering to fix everything in an instant, but he was offering something that felt real. His time, his support, and a chance for a different future. "I've been thinking about that," she replied slowly, her voice soft. "It's hard, you know. I've spent most of my life trying to survive, to figure things out on my own. I never really thought I'd get the chance to have something like this, a father who wants to be involved, who actually cares." The millionaire listened intently, feeling a weight settle on his chest as he took in her words. He had always been a man of action, someone who believed that hard work could solve anything. But this was different. He couldn't fix years of pain with a check or a grand gesture. This would take time. But hearing Jasmine's honesty, hearing how much she had been through, made him realize just how much he still needed to prove to her. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I'm not trying to rush you into anything. We can take it as slow as you need. I just want you to know that I'm here, no matter what." Jasmine nodded, her eyes thoughtful. It wasn't the perfect answer, and she wasn't ready to believe everything all at once. But there was something in his words, something in the way he looked at her that made her feel like, for the first time in her life, maybe she wasn't alone. "I'm still figuring things out," she said, a slight smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "But I think I'm starting to see a way forward. I don't know what the future holds, but maybe I can start letting you be part of it." The millionaire felt a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't the answer he had hoped for, but it was the one he knew he needed to hear. It was progress, a sign that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what had been broken. As they continued talking, the conversation shifted to lighter things, the little things that they both loved, the things that made them smile. Jasmine told him about her dreams of traveling, of seeing the world beyond the city. The millionaire listened, genuinely interested, realizing just how much he had missed in not being there for her. "I think I'd like to start school again," she said thoughtfully. "I've always wanted to go to college, but I never thought it was possible. Maybe now I can try." Hearing her talk about her dreams filled him with pride. She was strong, stronger than he had ever given her credit for, and he was determined to help her reach those dreams, no matter how difficult the journey would be. "That sounds like a great idea," he said with a smile. "And I'll help you, Jasmine. Whatever it takes, we'll figure it out together." For the first time, Jasmine felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wasn't the fairy tale she had dreamed of, but it was real. And maybe, just maybe, they could build something together, a bond that would last, even if it took time to get there. As the months passed, the bond between the millionaire and Jasmine continued to grow. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't without its challenges, but it was real. They began to build a relationship based on mutual respect, understanding, and a shared desire to move forward. There were still days when Jasmine found herself questioning everything, when the past felt too heavy to carry. But on those days, the millionaire was patient, reminding her that it was okay to feel uncertain, that it was okay to take things one step at a time. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Jasmine looked at him with a thoughtful expression. The sunlight was fading, casting a warm glow through the windows, and for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of peace in the room. "You know," Jasmine said slowly, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about being here for me. It's funny, but for the longest time, I never imagined I'd be in a place like this. I never thought I'd have a father who actually cared. It feels strange, but in a good way. I don't feel so alone anymore." The millionaire felt a lump form in his throat as he listened to her words. He had always believed that success in business was the greatest achievement, but now he understood that nothing could compare to the feeling of being needed by someone you loved. He had been given a second chance with Jasmine, and he wasn't going to take it for granted. "I'm glad you don't feel alone anymore," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't change what happened in the past, but I can be here now. And I'm not going anywhere, Jasmine. We'll figure this out together." Jasmine smiled, a small but genuine smile that made the millionaire's heart swell with hope. There was still so much to learn about each other, so much to rebuild, but for the first time, he felt like they were on the right path. Over the next few months, Jasmine took the steps to rebuild her own life. She enrolled in a local college, determined to follow her dreams. The millionaire supported her every step of the way, helping with tuition and encouraging her to pursue whatever made her happy. He saw the fire in her eyes when she talked about her studies, the excitement when she spoke about her goals. She wasn't just his daughter anymore. She was becoming her own person, and he was proud of her. Their weekends together became something Jasmine looked forward to. They would visit museums, go on hikes, or simply spend time talking over coffee. The millionaire found himself looking forward to these moments too. They weren't just about father-daughter bonding. They were about healing and moving forward, about creating a future that neither of them had expected, but both were now determined to make work. One day, as they sat in a park, Jasmine turned to him with a serious look on her face. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice hesitant, "about how much has changed for me in such a short time. I don't know if you realize this, but you're not just my father. You're also someone I've come to trust. I know we have a long way to go, but I feel like we're finally starting something real. I just wanted to thank you for not giving up on me." The millionaire felt tears welling up in his eyes, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. All the years of regret, all the missed opportunities, seemed to melt away in that moment. Jasmine wasn't just his daughter. She was his second chance, his chance to be the father he had never been, to give her the love and support she deserved. And he realized that no matter what the future held, he was ready to face it with her by his side. "I'm proud of you, Jasmine," he said finally, his voice filled with pride and love. "You've come so far, and I'll always be here for you. We've both been through a lot, but we've also come a long way. And I promise I'm not going anywhere. We'll face everything together as a family." As the sun set behind them, casting a golden glow over the park, Jasmine smiled at him. And for the first time, it felt like the future was full of endless possibilities. They weren't perfect, but they were together. And that was enough.